reporter and a former Little League All-Star coach. The loss left Snohomish, North Carolina, and Iowa in a tie for first place at the end of pool play. Only 2 teams advanced. Because of tiebreaker rules, Snohomish and North Carolina moved on. Iowa's coach protested, accused Snohomish of throwing the game to eliminate his team from the tournament. He said Snohomish was swinging at balls in the dirt and intentionally getting out. He said, "How about you try as hard as you can? Strategy may be great when you're a professional, but when you're dealing with 11 and 12-year-old kids, that sends the wrong message if, in fact, that was the intention." Little League International issued a statement saying the Little League International Tournament Committee recently received credible reports that some teams did not play with the effort and spirit appropriate for any Little League game. That means that Snohomish was forced to take the team it was accused of trying to duck Iowa in a one-game winner-take-all game. So, of course, this is not what the kids are thinking about. Snohomish lost to Iowa, by the way, 3-2, pushing them to 5th place against Uganda on Wednesday morning, and they're out of the semifinals. They have no chance at a Final Four game. Okay, so let me put it this way. I don't think that this is right. And I'm not talking about forcing people to try in a game. I'm talking about I don't think that it is right to punish the team and all the kids for the strategy of the coaches. That seems to me counterproductive. It's not these kids' fault. I mean, this idea that you are going to tell kids that they can no longer play in the Final Four because they did exactly what their coach told them to do and exactly what logic would suggest they do, that's absurd. And I think it's ridiculous that the Little League is actually punishing the kids from Snohomish by forcing them to play that game with Iowa. If you don't like the way the system works, then don't work the system that way. It's absurd that we have this routine where everybody understands the rules, and yet when somebody exploits the rules for their own gain, then we all go crazy. Hey, the fact is that if they wanted to eliminate Iowa, and Iowa didn't want to be eliminated, Iowa should have played harder earlier. You know, you get this all the time in basketball, people tanking for draft picks. As a fan of the Boston Celtics, I know full well what it is like to root for a team that routinely tanks for draft picks. And you know what? I root for them to tank. I would rather that they had not made the playoffs this year if it meant they had gotten a better draft pick. The rules are the rules. You may not like them. It may be hard on the kids from Iowa. But the fact is that if they didn't want to be in a tie, then they didn't have to be in a tie. I mean, this idea that somehow Snohomish and the coaches are responsible for what happened to the kids is nonsense. It's the league that's responsible for all of this again. They would be stupid not to do this. And you see this in football all the time. Bill Belichick routinely rests Tom Brady at the end of the regular season, specifically because he wants to get him rest for the playoffs. So if they're already assured of a playoff spot, they know who they're playing. Then Belichick doesn't waste his guys. He doesn't say, okay, we got to play as hard as we can today. We're going to play Tom Brady the entire game. No, he plays Jimmy Garoppolo. This idea that you have to constantly put out best effort in this case is winning. And by the way, what does it say to those kids who never got a start? Like, we understand who the best kids are, but those kids should never ever start? I think this is silly. I actually do. I think this is silly. I mean, the people who theoretically could have a complaint would be the kids who played in the game and either were no hit, either those kids or the kids on the other side who played in a game that was non-competitive, but I don't think those kids were complaining very much. Those kids seem to be okay with it from what I'm reading. Now, meanwhile, Mayor Ed Murray, who is just a stellar leader and somebody who truly stands up when he is called, apparently he frets about being the man, according to Danny Westneat over at the Seattle Times. According to Danny Westneat, Seattle is veering so hard left that even the most liberal mayor in the city's history may be too conservative. At least that's what's keeping him up nights. Yeah, I'm sure that he's deeply concerned about all of that. The truth is that Mayor Murray is a coward when it comes to governance. Mayor Murray is constantly doing this routine in which Mayor Murray suggests that he is not responsible for his own policy. Instead, he sets up these sort of proxy groups, and then the proxy groups come up with the policy, and he just endorses a policy that he implicitly endorsed before the proxy group even got started. The fact that Mayor Murray is shying away from the leadership role and then claiming he doesn't want to be the man. Well, if you don't want to be the man, don't be the mayor. Danny Westneat writes, it's always entertaining, sometimes revealing, to see what the out-of-town press finds when it comes to Seattle. No, I'm not talking about how all the Amazonians are weeping at their desks. I don't know how he missed that one. We're right here in the same neighborhood. I'm talking about the crisis apparently brewing down at City Hall. It's our mayor. It seems he's feeling unappreciated. It's not crying at his desk levels amongst. but it is keeping him up nights. Ed Murray, Seattle's Do You Like Me mayor, reads the headline of a story on OZ.com, a San Francisco area online magazine. In it, the writer comes to Seattle and asks our mayor, described as both high-flying and wildly successful. That seems high-flying, wildly successful, Mayor Murray. Have they met this guy? This guy has all the charisma of a speed bump. And apparently the mayor says to the interviewer what it is that gives him sleepless nights. Quote, and so Mayor Murray tells me what's keeping him up at night, pacing his bedroom in thin socks. Quote, after everything I've accomplished for this city, he says angrily, a reddish color flooding up his milky cheeks, I'm still the man. And by the man, he means he's an authority figure. See, this is the hard part about being a leftist. If you spend your entire life being an anti-authority figure, what happens when you're actually the authority? You can't be cool anymore. Oh, no. What a tragedy. Mayor Murray isn't cool anymore. He can't go to the cool kid parties because now he has actual responsibility. Holy insecurity complex, writes Danny Westneat. I had no idea the mayor was so conflicted or wore such thin socks. Since this utterance appeared online, several theories have arisen as to what Murray actually meant by this. Some have focused on the first part of what he said, where he's channeling Donald Trump. As anyone who has ever been a parent knows, if you start out a sentence with, after everything I've done for you, it tends not to matter how you finish. Everyone will be too busy rolling their eyes to hear. This is true. But some observers noted it was understandable the mayor might be feeling a bit burdened and weary after so much time at the helm of such a rambunctious and fast-growing family as Seattle. But then others pointed out he's only been mayor for 18 months. And what has he actually done? The answer is not much benefiting the city. For the left, I mean, he's rammed through $15 minimum wage, I guess. It was mostly the city council that did that. It was Shaun who forced the issue. I guess he's opened some homeless encampments, so the people of Seattle can thank him for looking out their window and seeing a bunch of unshaven, unshowered homeless people every day. That's exciting. More revealing, says Danny Westneat, is the second part of what he said, which is that even though he's the mayor, he declaims any desire to be known as the man. In fact, it rankles that some in the city apparently see him not as a well-meaning and friendly progressive here to help, but as the authority, the boss, the hammer, kind of like what happened to Bernie Sanders when he came here to speak. Others have pointed out that only in Seattle does the boss fret about the propriety of being known as the boss. It seems unlikely that the mayor of Chicago would lose any sleep over his status as the man. This is true. It's the kind of grunge hippie side of Seattle that would worry about, hey, he's the man. Dude, don't bow to the man. You can't trust the man. Murray is actually quoted in the story. He says, in his typically charismatic fashion, and here's where I do my Mayor Murray my Mayor Murray voice here, folks. So make sure you have two hands on the steering wheel at 9 and 3. And please ensure that you do not drive heavy machinery off the road and burst into flame when you fall asleep, because Mayor Murray, whether it is live audio or me doing my impression of Mayor Murray, he tends to cause people to go comatose. Mayor Murray says, my obituary has been written. If I fail at this job, I'm going to be okay. I did what I wanted to do. By the way, he has an approval rating of 70%. The last 3 Seattle mayors have all been voted out of office, so he should be getting a little bit worried, but nonetheless, he is pretty well ensconced. There are a lot of people who are worried that he's not liberal enough for the rest of Seattle, which is incredible, because Mayor Murray has basically been the appropriate follower to his predecessor, Mike McGinn, which is pretty harsh criticism. Now, folks, I did say earlier on the show that I have an announcement to make, and I will be making it continuously so folks know. Next week, August 28th to be precise, which, if I'm not mistaken, I believe is next Friday, that will be my last day on the air here at KTTH in the context of the Ben Shapiro show. The reason for that is not because I'm getting fired or anything. It's because it's my contract runs at the end of the year, and I will continue my relationship with KTTH. But as you may have noticed, I was absent for a week about 2 weeks ago, with my daughter. My daughter had open heart surgery, and she had a hole in her heart that had to be repaired. Thank God the surgery went really well. She's home. She's fine. But she does need somebody who's watching her a fair bit of the time, and she has to make sure that she doesn't bump her chest or hurt herself, because that could cause an issue and lead to, in the worst case scenario, repeat surgery, which you would never want. She's not on medication. There are no long-term impacts, but I do need to be home for the baby. And since my contract, as I said, is up at the end of the year anyway, KTTH management has been generous enough to allow me to cut out just a little bit early. That doesn't mean that my relationship with KTTH ends or with you ends, obviously. I'm still going to be coming to KTTH events. I'm still going to be appearing on KTTH regularly. And I do have a 1-hour podcast that's going to be launching in a couple of weeks that you should look out for sure. And look out for alerts on that at benshapiro.com or at my Twitter feed at Ben Shapiro. But I want to thank KTTH's management for their generosity in allowing me to cut out on my contract a little bit early, which is what's happening here, and thank them for their generosity in giving me the slot at KTTH. It's been an absolute pleasure being part of your life, being part of your community, and I can only hope that our relationship continues. Obviously, our relationships with all the people that we work with are going to continue apace, and it's been an unbelievably flattering experience to work with you and to get to know so many of you, particularly at the Freedom Series events. And I look forward to continuing to see you and be friends with you and talk to you on a regular basis. So look out for all future developments, and we will continue to keep those updated at ktth.com as well. Well, as we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, and Donald Trump continues to be in the news, but so there's a story from the Black Lives Matter movement that is absolutely astonishing, and I want to get to it. Plus, Planned Parenthood is in serious trouble again, and they should be. Any decent person should be looking to defund Planned Parenthood after the story I'm about to tell you. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. This is the Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com, live from the Online Trading Academy studio. Well, Donald Trump, if he is going to falter in the polls, if Donald Trump is going to go down in the polls, the reason that Donald Trump should go down in the polls has nothing to do with immigration, although I don't like some parts of his immigration plan. The reason that he should drop in the polls is because Donald Trump has said that he might fund Planned Parenthood. Forget about Republican and Democrat for a second. Forget about pro-life and pro-choice for a second. Planned Parenthood, anybody who wants Planned Parenthood funded at this point is just not a decent human being. And I say that for a very specific reason. Today, this group, the Center for Medical Progress, which has been exposing Planned Parenthood over the course of weeks, this group came out with a new video, the latest video, in which Holly O'Donnell describes a medical technician using scissors to cut through the face of a newly aborted but nearly fully developed baby boy at a Planned Parenthood facility so his intact brain could be extracted. O'Donnell said the technician could also jog the boy's heart so that the heart would beat. Because obviously, folks, these are babies. Planned Parenthood is working hard to counter the steady drip of damning videos produced by the Center for Medical Progress, according to Austin Ruse at Breitbart, but not even the highest-priced Washington, D.C. flacks are likely to be able to erase the thought picture of someone cutting through a child's face with scissors. Holly O'Donnell and her Planned Parenthood colleague were harvesting organs that day at Planned Parenthood Marmonte, which is a mega clinic in San Jose, California. It has an annual budget of $100 million. That's 10% of the entire national organization. O'Donnell turned whistleblower after leaving STEM Express. That is the company that has been purchasing all of these baby body parts for distribution to medical research facilities. She said the child was the most fully developed one she'd seen up to that point. She describes in great detail how the newly aborted boy was rinsed off and prepared for dissection. And the reason that they preserved the body is specifically so that they could dissect it and use it for organs, because the truth is most abortion procedures, they actually chop up the baby in the womb so that the mother can deliver it, especially in late-term abortion. Apparently, her colleague calls her over and, according to O'Donnell, said, "Hey, Holly, come over here. I want you to see something kind of cool, kind of neat." O'Donnell said she was flabbergasted to see the most gestated fetus and closest thing to a baby I've seen. Her colleague took an instrument and tapped the heart, and it starts beating. Getting chills, and it's just horrifying to think about. O'Donnell says, "I'm sitting here looking at this fetus. It's not a fetus, it's a baby. Its heart is beating. I don't know what to think." She said she didn't know if the child was alive or dead, but it had a face. It wasn't completely torn up. Its nose was very pronounced. It had eyelids. Its mouth was pronounced. The medical technician said the child was so intact they could, quote, procure a lot from it. We're going to procure a brain. The tech then told O'Donnell they would need to go through the face. And this is Joseph Mengele sort of stuff, folks. And again, I don't know how any decent human being could want to keep clinics like Planned Parenthood open. I mean, I don't know how any decent human being at this point is in favor of any form of even mildly late-term abortion. And there I'm talking about anything beyond the first trimester. I think that even first trimester abortion is a great evil. But for you to picture this in your head and then to say, yeah, that sounds good to me, you have to just be an evil human being. I don't know any other way to put that. That's to picture the idea of a 5-month-old fetus, a 5-month-old baby being removed from the womb and its face cut through with scissors to obtain the brains for research is just frightening. The medical tech took scissors, cut through the child's lower jaw up through the mouth. O'Donnell was directed to cut the rest of the way through the middle of the face. O'Donnell said, I can't even describe what that feels like. And then O'Donnell took the boy's remains, put him in a biohazard container, and, quote, then I realized I was the only person ever to hold that baby. That was the moment I realized I couldn't work for STEM Express anymore. Well, that was the moment when she should have become a campaigner against STEM Express. The fact that there are people who are willingly engaging in this evil and then standing up for the funding of this email is truly frightening and speaks to the evil that's inherent, I think, in humanity, the evil that exists in all of us if we don't guard against the presence of that evil. The reason I describe this stuff in detail is because I think it's important to know the horrors of what it is that we are pursuing in our own country, the horrors of what's happening right here with our taxpayer dollars. It's ugly. It's unpleasant. I saw a lot of tweets from people today saying they didn't want to watch the video. And all I can say is if you don't want to watch the video, I put you in the same category as the folks who didn't want to watch the video of 9/11 when 9/11 was happening, because this is an ongoing process. And we're not talking here about something that happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We're talking about something that is happening today, every day in clinics across the United States with taxpayer funding. Forget taxpayer funding. This should be illegal all the way across the board. The idea of, I've heard people say, make the moral argument, not the legal argument. It's like saying make the moral argument about slavery, but don't actually ban slavery. Now, great moral evils should be illegal. This is a great moral evil. And God is, honestly, John Adams said about slavery that there would be a reckoning in this country over slavery. There will be a reckoning in this country over the murder of the unborn. The latest video is both the least graphic and most graphic video produced by David Zeladen and his team. The video comes at a time when Planned Parenthood is trying to fight back with high-powered PR people and a new advertising campaign launched in selected markets. And of course, remember, Hillary Clinton is a huge fan of Planned Parenthood, and she has come out in favor of Planned Parenthood. Originally, she said that she found these videos disturbing. She said she thought these videos were just disturbing and upsetting. And then she explained that what she meant by these videos were disturbing, and she was disturbed by how they were obtained. If what bothers you about obtaining videos of babies being chopped up and sold is how they were obtained, not the actual chopping up of the baby, I can't speak to your basic morality. I don't know how you can hold yourself up as a decent human being and believe in these things. It's just egregious and horrifying on every possible level. And this is why I say Trump is going to have to change his position. And this whole thing, do they do 3% abortions or 85% abortions? Who cares? It's like saying the mafia only does only 3% of what the mafia does is whack people and throw them into the bay with cement around their shoes. It's only 3% of what they do, so no big deal. Well, no, that's the key to what they do. Okay, if they murdered one baby, you should defund the entire organization. And this is on the Republicans. It really is. It's on the Republicans. It is on people like John Boehner and Mitch McConnell who run Congress and should be putting this up for a vote every day, and they should be willing to shut down the government to defund Planned Parenthood. They should. Almost 2 million babies have been aborted by Planned Parenthood since John Boehner became Speaker of the House. With Senator Harry Reid as the head of the Senate, there is only so much you can do, but defunding starts in the House. The fact that we have not done this is beyond me. Just terrible. The footage also contains interviews with officials from Planned Parenthood and two other human tissue companies, Advanced Bioscience Resources and Novogenics Labs, who discuss the practice of injecting fetuses with a drug called digoxin. This is according to the Washington Examiner. Digoxin results in the death of the fetus before abortion is performed, so the doctors can't be accused of violating the federal ban on partial birth abortion. There is a federal ban on partial birth abortion. Digoxin means you just give the baby an injection, you kill the baby in the womb, and then you partially deliver it, as opposed to you partially deliver it, stab it in the head with the scissors, and suck its brains out into a sink. Ben Van Handel is executive director of Novogenics Labs. He says that sometimes a fetus's heart is still beating after the abortion, although that's unclear whether it's with the use of digoxin or without. She says, there are times when after the procedure is done, the heart is still beating. It's Nazi-esque type stuff. happening right here in the United States, and people sitting there and just the capacity to blind ourselves to the things that are ugly to us, the capacity to blind ourselves to things that are just horrific to think about. That's how evil succeeds. As I've said on the program, it's not just that evil succeeds when good people do nothing. It's that evil succeeds when mediocre people turn a blind eye to evil. Most of us are mediocre. Most of us have done good. Most of us have done bad. But deep evil like this is something that can't be wished away into the cornfield. This isn't something that we can just pretend doesn't exist. As we continue here on The Ben Shapiro Show, there's a big Black Lives Matter protester. He's a figure. His name is Shaun King. There's some new revelations about him that may change your opinion of him, even if you're a Black Lives Matter protester. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. This is The Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com, live from the Online Trading Academy studio. Well, folks, you remember the case of Rachel Dolezal. You remember Rachel Dolezal. Rachel Dolezal was, of course, the woman from Spokane, Washington, who was the head of the local chapter of the NAACP. Rachel Dolezal was the woman who was on the police commission over in Spokane. And Rachel Dolezal, it turned out, was not a black lady at all. It turns out that she is whiter than I am. Well, now it turns out there may be a second Rachel Dolezal. A second Rachel Dolezal. According to Milo Yiannopoulos over at Breitbart News, an investigative blogger has accused Shaun King, a key figure in the Black Lives Matter movement, of misleading media icon Oprah Winfrey by pretending to be biracial in order to qualify for an Oprah scholarship to historically black Morehouse College. The blogger says King is white and has been lying about his ethnicity for years. King is a high-profile campaigner against police brutality, of course, and a justice correspondent for the liberal Daily Kos website. He told Rebel magazine in 2012 he was biracial. The magazine reported he was the son of a Caucasian mother and a black father. He has described himself as mixed with a black family on Twitter. King has been lionized by the press. He's been praised as a hero of civil rights and social activism. He wrote extensively about a childhood in which he was terrorized by decades-old racial tensions. He said he was the focus of constant abuse of the resident rednecks of my school. But in recent weeks, rumors have been circulating about his ethnicity. A 1995 police incident lists Shaun King's ethnicity as white. Blogger Vicky Pate, who's been assembling forensic accounts of Shaun King's background and family tree on her blog, has published her findings. She claims King is entirely white. She says that a birth certificate, which Breitbart has independently acquired from the Kentucky Office of Vital Statistics, names a white man as his father. King's case sounds exactly like Rachel Dolezal, of course. Shaun King often uses black and white photographs of himself online rather than color images, and it's possible that he misled Oprah Winfrey by applying for and accepting an Oprah scholarship to the historically black Morehouse College. Oprah scholarships are given exclusively to black men. King has referred to himself as a brother in his writing. He said, Oprah Winfrey paid my way through Morehouse. The leadership scholarship I received from her is why I have a college degree today. 500 other brothers have the exact same story. So he's a brother, even though he is apparently and allegedly completely biologically white. Shaun King's biography has attracted the attention of bloggers and journalists thanks to several bizarre inconsistencies with his public claims. So in 2014, for example, King wrote on Twitter he was father to 3 black girls. 6 months earlier, he claimed to be a father to 4. He's also claimed to have endured 4 spinal surgeries, but then that shrunk to 3. Also, he apparently claimed that he was the victim of a brutal, racially motivated beating in 1995. At least 2 reports have described it as Kentucky's first hate crime. It did not match up with a police report from the case. According to the Daily Caller's Chuck Ross, King has said he was attacked by up to a dozen racist redneck students. Official records show the altercation involved only 1 other student. The police report characterized his injuries as minor, even though he said it was a brutal beating. More details have now emerged from King's account that don't match up with the police report or eyewitness accounts from journalists who noticed that King's public claims did not square with reality. Even his own publication suggested there might be something fishy about him. So apparently his dad is a guy named Jeffrey Wayne King, and he is as white as the day is long. And that's pretty white. Shaun King has said, quote, I was raised in rural Kentucky. It was actually pretty rough. African Americans faced a lot of racism and discrimination growing up. I never really experienced overt racism myself until high school. He said, I was put into a weird position when a huge group of students hated me for no reason. And by the time he was reporting those comments, he must have known that people were having questions about his race. This does raise a broader question, however, and a more important question than just this particular guy. And that is, why do we now have a spate of white people trying to pass as black? Like, what is going through the heads of Shaun King and Rachel Dolezal? What's the point? Well, I think the answer is actually pretty simple. Being black in America in 2015 is not a victimhood status. Okay, it is perceived as a status symbol and as an advantage. As well it should be. Okay, the fact is that there is a terrible, horrible, evil racial history to the United States that we have spent the last 50 years, and really since the Civil War, attempting to rip out of America. And all of that is true, and all of that is decent. And the fact is that a disproportionate number of black people do live in poverty and are victims of crime. But on an individual, one-to-one basis, if you have a black guy and a white guy, and they are similarly situated economically, if they are similarly situated with regard to where they live, if they are similarly situated with regard to background, and the only difference is skin color, the black guy has an advantage in just about every area of American life, specifically because of America's attempts to overcome its racially brutal history. The fact is that blackness is beneficial. Barack Obama would not be president of the United States, and he certainly would not have been reelected in 2012 were he not a black man. Dr. Ben Carson would not be more well-known than Dr. Milton Wolfe. Milton Wolfe ran for Senate in Kentucky were he not a black guy. And King knows it. Shaun King knows that, and so does Rachel Dolezal. As we said, King allegedly received a scholarship specifically based on race. And he apparently took a scholarship away from a black person to attend Morehouse College. But the fact that scholarships based on race are even acceptable in today's America, that's only true if you're black. Right? There's no such thing as a white scholarship, a scholarship for white people, because the perception is black people are so victimized that they need special advantages given to them. And so there are special advantages that are given to black people in the United States with regard to academia. It's true in terms of admissions as well. Standards are lower for blacks generally at top universities. A Princeton University study showed that blacks receive a bonus of 230 points on SAT scores versus their competitors. By contrast, Asians are penalized at 50 points versus their white competitors. So you're actually penalized if you are Asian. And the same holds true for finding a position in academia. If you're black, you're going to get a job at Eastern Washington University like Rachel Dolezal. If you're white, then probably not. And this is also true when you discuss crimes, when you talk about activism. That's why Dolezal ended up on the Spokane Volunteer Police Oversight Commission. Shaun King has been, this guy now apparently masquerading as a black guy, he's claimed to be victimized by decades-old racial tensions, and then he's become a campaigner against police brutality. Well, that's because it's pretty hard to find prominence and cash as a protester against police brutality as a non-black person. I mean, the fact is that the Black Lives Matter movement has been given special sainted status because of the race of the people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. The fact is they're defending criminals. Michael Brown is a criminal. Condoning black criminality and saying that white police officers are responsible for black criminality is an absurdity on its face, and yet it's being portrayed as some sort of racial strength. That wouldn't hold true if Black Lives Matter protesters weren't black. That's as one Black Lives Matter protester told Hillary Clinton, quote, "This is and always has been a white problem of violence. There's not much we can do as black people to stop the violence against us." You know, this notion that blacks are inherently put upon, that blacks are inherently victimized, has now pervaded American consciousness. So you have both Republican and Democratic candidates telling outright lies about America's criminal justice system. For example, you've heard a bunch of times that blacks are more likely to be executed than whites. That's true. There are a disproportionate number of blacks on death row because blacks commit a disproportionate number of murders, and they particularly commit a disproportionate number of murders against strangers, which is really where most death row convicts are. Studies tend to show there is no clear link between the race of the perpetrator and death row inmates. Police actually hesitate more often in violent confrontations with black suspects because they're afraid of being pilloried. They shoot black suspects less often than white suspects given a similar situation. As far as sentencing disparities, you keep hearing that black folks spend more time in jail because of race. That's not true. That's not true. There are other factors, including prior crimes and criminal history, that actually impact that. Heather McDonald of Manhattan Institute has observed cops don't over-arrest blacks and ignore white criminals. The race of criminals reported by crime victims matches arrested data. No one has ever come up with a plausible argument as to why crime victims would be biased in their reports. The fact is that in the inner cities, this is to the detriment of black folks, by the way. This is to the detriment of black folks. The reality is that in African-American neighborhoods, according to Jill Levy, the liberal reporter for the LA Times, far too many killers have gotten away with far too many crimes for far too long, fueling a disastrous murder epidemic. Killers are getting away with it in black areas. Solving these murders, she writes, and other serious crimes of violence in black communities should be a top goal for law enforcement. It deserves to take priority over much more widely discussed issues, such as racial profiling and excessive use of force. But that won't happen because we've all done this routine where we buy into the idea that blacks are inherently victimized in the United States, and that's just not true. That's why you are seeing people like Shaun King masquerade as black, because there are advantages to be got from masquerading as black. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. It used to be in the United States, when the United States was a deeply racist country, it used to be that black people tried to masquerade as white, specifically because of the advantages that accrued to being white. Today, you're seeing white people masquerade as black, specifically because of the advantages that accrue to being black. And by the way, you're seeing it in terms of even the movies. I mean, Straight Outta Compton, for example, we talked about this yesterday, but Straight Outta Compton, which made $60 million over the weekend, completely elided the fact that Dr. Dre's brutal beating on a black TV host named Dee Barnes, female black TV host, it goes completely without comment in the movie. Dr. Dre is now worth a fortune. Can you imagine if there were a white artist who brutally beat a woman and that were not included in the film? Can you imagine if that were the case? Especially if it went to character, which it does. According to Barnes herself, the reason that it's not in the movie is because the director played a role in the ordeal and doesn't want to address it. Dr. Dre slammed Barnes' head against a wall, kicked her, and stepped on her fingers. The assault was so violent, Barnes thought, she thought he's going to kill her, actually. In her essay, she said that Gray was the cameraman for the show back when she was interviewing Ice Cube, and Ice Cube said some bad stuff about Dr. Dre, and so Dr. Dre didn't get mad at Ice Cube, he got mad at her and beat the crap out of her. She said, I think a huge reason Gary doesn't want to address it is because then he'd have to explain his part in history. He's obviously uncomfortable for a reason. But again, unless you're Ray Rice and it's actually caught on camera, the fact is that black criminals are given a significant amount more sympathy if they are high profile than white criminals similarly situated. Right? Where are the protesters for Charles Manson? I don't see them. Mumia Abu-Jamal has an entire movement built around the idea that he didn't kill a police officer when there were several eyewitnesses, including black eyewitnesses, who saw him stand over the body of a police officer and shoot him, repeatedly. O.J. Simpson is still thought to be innocent by a plurality of black folks in the United States. As we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, a prominent Democratic senator has now come out against President Obama's Iran deal. What does that mean for the future of the Iran deal? Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. This is the Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com, live from the Online Trading Academy studio. Well, the President of the United States is going to get his Iran deal. Everybody keeps saying, oh, this is up in question. No, it really is not. The only reason you're seeing prominent Democrats come out against President Obama's Iran deal at this point is because they feel that it is guaranteed that President Obama will get the votes he needs elsewhere. Right now, based on the available voting patterns and how we know people are going to vote, Republicans somehow need to, there are basically 14 outstanding Democratic senators. In order for Republicans to come up with a veto-proof majority in order to override President Obama's Iran deal, they need to get 11 of those 14. That is not going to happen. That is very, very unlikely to happen. President Obama will have senators cover for him, and enough senators who are in vulnerable areas will vote against Obama that they'll be able to sort of enshrine themselves. I was talking with somebody who is close to the Schumer camp yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, who has been a lackey for President Obama and is a powerful Democrat in the Senate, the number 3 Democrat in the Senate, likely at some point to become the Senate Majority Leader or Senate Minority Leader, depending on how elections go, but at least the leader of the Senate Democrats, Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer came out against the deal. And I was saying that it was pretty clear to me that this was a scam, that Chuck Schumer was coming out against the deal because he knew that the deal would go forward anyway, so he might as well be able to avoid all of the difficulties of having to cast a vote alongside President Obama. It's the best of all the available worlds for him. Obama gets what he wants, Chuck Schumer gets what he wants, and nobody really loses. And my friend pointed out, and he's totally right, that the same day that Chuck Schumer came out in favor of pushing the deal over, Kirsten Gillibrand came out in favor of the deal itself. Now, Gillibrand, he pointed out, and Schumer are tied at the hip. Gillibrand is basically Chuck Schumer's client, and Chuck Schumer basically made it so that Gillibrand was appointed to her position. And so the idea that Gillibrand came out in favor of the deal without Chuck Schumer's go-ahead is extremely unlikely. The idea this is where they have their first battle is very, very unlikely. Well, today we have another one of these situations. Senator Bob Menendez, who actually legitimately is against the deal, Democrat of New Jersey, he came out against the deal. He said he'd vote to reject it. He dealt a supposedly major blow to the White House. He said, I have looked into my own soul, and my devotion to principle may once again lead me to an unpopular course. But if Iran is to acquire a nuclear bomb, it will not have my name on it. He said that in an address Tuesday afternoon. He said, it is for this reason that I will vote to disapprove of the agreement and, if called upon, would vote to override a veto. The senator has led the charge to impose harsher sanctions on Iran. He said that the deal would do little to rein in Iran's nuclear weapons program. He said President Obama continues to erroneously say that this agreement permanently stops Iran from having a nuclear bomb. Let's be clear. What the agreement does is to recommit Iran not to pursue a nuclear bomb, a promise they've already violated in the past. It recommits them to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, an agreement they've already violated in the past. It commits them to a new Security Council resolution outlining their objections, but they have violated those in the past as well. Bob Menendez, the senator, non-Jewish senator from New Jersey, he says, the deal leaves Iran with the core element of a robust nuclear infrastructure. He said the president and Secretary Kerry have repeatedly said the choice is between this agreement or war. I reject that proposition, as have most witnesses, including past and present administration members involved in the Iran nuclear issue, who have testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and who support the deal but reject the binary choice between the agreement or war. And then he says the agreement that has been reached failed to achieve the one thing it set out to achieve. It failed to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons state at a time of its choosing. In fact, it authorizes and supports the very roadmap Iran will need to arrive at its target. Strong language from Bob Menendez. Unlikely, however, that Republicans are able to grab enough Democrats in order to stop the deal. And President Obama, because he's President Obama, he says he's going to go ahead with the deal anyway. He says even if the vote would go against him, he would just go ahead with the deal. That's unsurprising, considering that the President of the United States has been able to do whatever he wants. And again, this is the fault of Senate Republicans, folks. This is Mitch McConnell's fault. This is Bob Corker's fault, what's happening right now. This is a treaty. It is not an executive agreement. An executive agreement is an agreement that is authorized by the Congress of the United States for the President of the United States to go ahead and negotiate. That's the difference between an executive agreement and the Iran deal. Nowhere did Congress give the President explicit permission to go negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran. Nowhere did they do that. They did that at no point. Now, because of the stupidity of Senate Republicans, and really not the stupidity, because the Senate Republicans are corrupt, and so the Senate Republicans play this game where they act as though they are big advocates in favor of a particular set of policies, and then at the first available opportunity, they undermine those policies. It's absurd. All they had to do was stand up to President Obama and say, look, this is a treaty. You're going to need two-thirds approval in order for this to go through. Now, they need two-thirds opposition in order to stop him. That is a direct reversal of what exactly the Constitution was supposed to say. It's absurd on every level. And it's tragic for the Republic and really for the future of global prosperity and peace that Republicans wimped out on this. I expect this from Democrats. I do. I expect Democrats to do this routine. The Republicans, I expect better, and that, I guess, is the problem. Now, meanwhile, Donald Trump has come out with his position on Iran, and the Donald's position on Iran is not good. It is not a good position, to say the least. And you know it's not good when you have people like Chris Hayes over at MSNBC actually pushing the position. So what did Donald Trump say about the Iran deal? Well, he said that he would not reject it on day one. He said he wouldn't reject it on day one. He said, I've heard a lot of people say we're going to rip up the deal. It's very tough to do when you say rip up a deal. You know, I've taken over some bad contracts. I buy contracts where people screwed up and they have bad contracts. But I'm really good at looking at a contract and finding things within a contract that, even if they're bad, I would police that contract so tough they don't have a chance. As bad as the contract is, I will be so tough on that contract. He said, the problem is, by the time I got in there, they'll already have received $150 billion. Do you know if the deal gets rejected, they still get the money? Which is something I found out a week ago. I couldn't believe it. If the deal gets rejected, they still get all of the money. That's true because President Obama will get rid of the holds on the bank accounts. Iran is going to be unbelievably powerful and unbelievably rich. Michael Rubin, who's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, he says, I sympathize with Trump's passion about how disastrous the deal is, but bluster isn't policy. Obama has designed the deal to give up all the goods up front. Trump has got to realize when you've gone all the way on your first date, simply saying you're going to walk away with your virginity isn't going to reflect reality. The question Trump has to answer is, if Obama has given $100 billion in sanctions relief, lifted international sanctions, blessed an industrial-sized nuclear program, what's he going to do to reverse that? And that is the question. There have been a bunch of candidates, by the way, all who say that they will get rid of the deal day one. That's Scott Walker, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz. If Trump really thinks he's going to be able to police the deal, that's a bit of naivete. I have a feeling that Donald Trump is going to rethink this particular position, particularly after he received praise from Chris Hayes on MSNBC.
I've heard a lot of people say, we're going to rip up the deal. It's very tough to do when you say rip up a deal, because I'm a deal person. And
you get that, even if it's you made you.
Let me tell you, but I will police that deal.
So the deal lives in a Trump administration.
Well,
you're just going to be.
It's very hard to say we're ripping up, and the problem is, by the time I got in there, they will have already received the $150 billion.
That position, that he wouldn't simply rip up the Iran deal on day one, is a, well, eminently sensible one, particularly for a guy who's supposed to be a Tea Party hero. It's also the sort of thing that would get, I would wager, any other candidate in the Republican field absolutely torn to shreds by some of the same conservative commentators who are now celebrating Trump.
And the fact is that Trump, I think, is going to have to walk this one back. He's now on the same side of the argument as Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is Jimmy Carter's foreign policy guru, who says that Iran is going to become a force for good. Now, I don't know that Trump is on the same side precisely, but this idea that he's not going to rip up the deal day one, that's code. And the truth is he's going to have to, again, get practical. What does he mean that he's going to police the deal? How is that going to work? Under the terms of the deal, you can't really police the deal. Under the terms of the deal, it's very difficult to police the deal. So how exactly he's going to do that, that remains undefined. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com.